My name is Julian Finn, that's Oliver Moldenhauer. We will tell you a bit about the TRIPS agreement treaty of the WTO and what that means for us as people who are interested in all sorts of intellectual property rights issues. Yes, I want to start with a short overview. We're going to explain shortly what intellectual property rights today mean economically, what the TRIPS agreement actually is. Then we want to talk about a few terms we're using before we're going into explaining what that agreement actually means for developing countries. And then in detail what TRIPS means for software patents, medical agents, and in terms of medical agents, what it means for countries like Brazil and India. And then we're going to talk, or Oliver is going to talk about the meeting, the WTO meeting that happened in Hong Kong 2 weeks ago, where he attended as a delegate, NGO delegate. To finish with what we demand and a bit of discussion. I'm totally blinded by this light.
Some sunglasses?
Entschuldigung? Kann man das Licht irgendwie? Thank you very much. Still blind. Yes, it's the German text, but to explain what intellectual property means, we have a graph of the US exports of core copyright industries, showing how much copyright value has risen in the last 20 years, with software being the most important branch there, and also film and video, as well as books and music, basically.
Maybe one point, we can see how much money we are talking about. These are, for 2002, these are $90 billion. For comparison, the same year, the US paid approximately $60 billion for the oil bill. So actually what they do is they make little silvery discs in Seattle and use that to pay for the oil they acquire.
Yes, next illustrates a bit better. Copyright or intellectual property industry is actually the most valuable export branch in the US, which supersedes chemistry, cars, airplanes, agricultural products, electronic bits, and computers. Or, in other terms, it takes a bit to actually load. No, it just takes a bit. It's a big file. This is a graph that shows the net payments for countries from lower developed countries towards highly developed countries such as the US or Europe. And from 1993 till now, we had a rise by about, a lot of percent anyway. Too lazy to calculate now. And it shows that the low developed countries at the moment are paying something like $9.5 billion every year in copyright and patent licenses towards the Western developed world. So there's actually, the money goes out of the countries that need it the most. Yeah, talking about terms. We don't like the term intellectual property because it assumes that it's actually a property you can hold and you can grab, and so if you lose it, you actually lost something. If you copy something, there's no loss. So property is not the right term. Also, property is mostly used positively. With intellectual property, we have our issues and wouldn't like to use it as positive. Therefore, we decided to use the term intellectual monopoly rights, because if I invent something, the state grants me a monopoly for a certain term on that, what I invented or what I wrote or what I what I played on my guitar. So intellectual monopoly rights is our term for the next, few minutes. Yes, short explanation in German, never mind the stuff at the bottom. What the WTO actually is and what carries the WTO. I think Oliver is the best for explaining that.
Okay, the WTO, the World Trade Organization, originated out of the very long series of negotiations in the GATT, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, and this started in 1947 and concluded in 1994, and led to the founding of the WTO. Every WTO member has to agree to ratify quite a lot of agreements. The most important of them are the GATT treaty on the far left. That's about trade in goods, like cars and steel and stuff. The GATS treaty, General Agreement on Trade and Services, which is about services, like banks, like the right to build a bank in a certain country, like construction and so on, and which sounds a bit strange because it doesn't seem to have so much to do with trade, the TRIPS, the Agreement on Intellectual Property. And the important thing is that basically all important countries except Russia, and they're negotiating their accession to the WTO, virtually every other country is part of the WTO, including China, including most of the least developed countries, including, of course, the European Union and the United States. This is because if you're not member to the WTO, you lose a lot of trade privileges. So there's a very strong push towards getting WTO membership and thereby ratifying TRIPS. And the TRIPS?
Yeah, the TRIPS is we've said it so often, the trade-related aspects of intellectual property rights. Every WTO member must ratify the TRIPS, which became effective in 1995. And this doesn't mean that countries like, least developed countries had to ratify it in 1995. There are certain transition periods up to 2005. For example, India had to ratify the TRIPS by 2005, 2006 or 2014 for the very least developed countries in Africa. The TRIPS regulates minimum standards for intellectual monopoly rights, such as copyrights, which they're the minimum standard for ratification is the death of the author plus 50 years. Patents is minimum 20 years. Patents on pharmaceutical agents have to be implemented on microorganisms too. Patents are a system sui generis for plant varieties have to be implemented, and trademarks have to be implemented in those countries. And the tricky thing about the TRIPS is that if you violate it, you can be punished by any trade sanctions. So, for example, if I'm a country that, if China wouldn't do so much against the copying of DVDs, Germany, the European Union could ban could put import taxes on textiles, for example. On the other way around, this is also possible. The US, for example, still subsidizes cotton, which Brazil doesn't like, and won against on the WTO panel. So Brazil now can copy CDs if they want to. Well, it's a bit strange, this kind of thing, because it's not really related to each other. I mean, if I put taxes on steel and some other country therefore wants to put taxes on oil, that's all right. But putting taxes on not copying certain, say medical agents, and therefore being banned for, I don't know. It's a bit strange. Yeah.
I mean, that's the main reason why TRIPS is so important. There are many other international agreements on intellectual property, for instance, the Berne Convention, there's the World Intellectual Property Organization, and so on and so forth. But TRIPS has teeth, because it's part of the WTO dispute settlement mechanism, and you have an actual kind of court where you can be taken to if you violate TRIPS. And this way, we have to look, if you want to see how too strong intellectual monopoly rights can hurt the economy, we have to look very deeply into TRIPS, because that's the most dangerous and most important one.
Yes. I mean, I think the largest problem is that TRIPS is the worst deal for developing countries. Developing countries usually only have very low base on copyright or patents. Country like Rwanda wouldn't have many patents on anything. Now they have to implement loads and loads of patents from the Western world, which is new. When Germany developed or when Japan developed, they just ignored patents from other countries, just built their own things in order to develop, in order to export goods. And then when they developed, they suddenly implemented a patent system that was quite strong. Countries like India, Brazil, or even smaller, lower developed countries don't have that possibility. So, yeah, it's like kicking away the ladder. It's countries that are at the top. Other countries that want to follow, they don't have a chance. Also, yeah, it diminishes the digital commons. Countries that would have a broader common knowledge must now implement stronger intellectual monopoly rights, and therefore diminish their common pool on knowledge. It also limits. We also work for the idea of a content or alternative compensation system, content flat rate idea. The TRIPS actually limits the possibilities for these things, because it. You have to have certain minimum standards. And yeah, again, why in the WTO? It's not about trade, it's about other things. And basically, it's about larger countries opposite to lower developed ones. I think Oliver's best on the next part.
So now we want to go through a few of the especially problematic parts of TRIPS that are discussed now currently. One is the whole question of patents on drugs. So that the TRIPS treaty had very long transition periods when it comes to drugs, depending on the state of the country, whether it's a developed country that had before patents on drugs, or at least developed countries. The transition periods ends in 2005, 2006, or 2014. One example where you can see how strong TRIPS actually is that the patents on drugs are not that new, not that old. For instance, in Germany, there haven't been any patents on pharmaceutical agents up till 1968. That astonished me a lot when I heard it first. I thought it was something from the 19th century, but it actually worked quite well up until then in Germany. And now we forced it onto countries which states of which the state of development of which, yeah. Sorry, I'm not native to this language, is a lot less than Germany in 1968. So we had that has also a discussion on patents on drugs as a law, as some tradition. We had a big case in 2002 when in South Africa, one of the states where the HIV pandemic is worst, the pharmaceutical companies took the government to court because they allowed South African companies to copy anti-HIV AIDS drugs. And finally, in the end, it turned out that the companies had to withdraw